Namaste Starlights. I am in bed today because I had my bi-yearly infusion for my multiple sclerosis, which is called Ocrevus. So I had my Ocrevus today, and usually it can take a lot out of me, so I'm resting. Once again, this is the year of rest in 2025. We're not doing anything crazy this year. But I wanted to make a video and touch base a little bit about chronic illness and grief. Whenever I have my infusion, like it's coming up and I'm in the process of it, it's usually for me the time where my grief comes out the most, because I only have my infusion twice a year. So the rest of the year I'm just doing my thing, because I'm fortunate and blessed enough that my multiple sclerosis doesn't like affect my day-to-day necessarily too much. It's more cognitive than it is physical, but there's still grief in that, right? When you're diagnosed with a chronic illness, whether it's an autoimmune disease, whether it's cancer, an autoimmune diseases, this can include rheumatoid arthritis, like diabetes, lupus, right? Just anything that you have to maintain for the rest of your life or be on top of for the rest of your life, it's life altering and can be very traumatic. For me, I do have medical trauma because of my MS diagnosis. And I talked about the story in the video on my YouTube channel, but I think it's important once again to tap into and acknowledge the grief process and where you're at in the grief process. So it's recognizing that for me, my body may never be the same anymore. Well, it kind of was never normal. I was actually born with a type of muscular dystrophy called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, which is pretty rare. But with that, the difference is that I grew up with it, and so it was familiar. And so when I got the MS diagnosis in 2019, about 5 years ago, it entered a whole new world of unknowns. And I don't know, MS felt scarier and heavier than it did with my Charcot-Marie-Tooth, because it was this new thing. But yeah, if you have a chronic illness or are diagnosed with a chronic illness, I think part of it is having self-compassion towards yourself and allowing yourself to grieve. You're going to grieve. Even last week, I had a moment, and I also talked about this in a video on my YouTube channel, but where I cried last week because I spelled a word wrong. I also had a couple of instances of MS brain that kind of led up to that point, but the tipping point was me spelling a word wrong. It sometimes takes something that small, but being kind and soft with yourself. Things are not going to look the same. And that's fact, right? So that's where we enter the radical acceptance of, this is my life now. I don't like it, but this is it. So then we enter a strengths-based perspective and ask ourselves, what are we going to do with this? For me, I've tried to take my multiple sclerosis as a way of telling me to rest and slow down. There's this book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Maté, I may be saying his name wrong, that talks about how he interviewed a lot of people with chronic illness. Once again, things from MS to cancers and in between. and how a lot of them were like, it just taught me how to put myself first. Being diagnosed with cancer taught me just to take more risks for myself. Having MS taught me to stop being so codependent on other people. And that's what I take for myself, right? Because this is it. Unless they find a cure, I'm gonna have multiple sclerosis for the rest of my life. And so now it's like, what can I do? And this is part of why I, in my work as a mental health therapist, want to work with other people with chronic illness and MS, because I get it. And it can feel isolating and lonely. And to have someone who just gets it changes so much. And to share my story too of my diagnosis journey, and hope that other people who are just freshly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis can find it relatable or comforting. Because you're going to hear all types of people telling you all types of different things. I know this person who was diagnosed with MS. I know this person who was diagnosed with cancer. This is what happened to them. And they mean it in like good jest, but sometimes it just helps to have someone you know. But I know I'm kind of going off topic here, but just allowing yourself to grieve. Because we think grief is death of a loved one, pet, but grief is loss. So 5 stages: anger, denial, bargaining, acceptance, and depression. And then it's about how can you take this diagnosis and still live a full life. I made that a vow to myself to still try and live a full life even with MS. I went out of the country for the first time last year. I still try and go to music festivals and move my body because I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that still. And I don't know when I may not be able to anymore. But if you're dealing with something like this, I hear you, and it's hard. You cry, be mad, but at the end of the day, accept that this is where you're at. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but now what? How are you going to make the most out of this and to your advantage? So that's kind of it. Just check in with yourself. Allow yourself to feel whatever comes up. Know that you also are more than just your body too. You're not just your body. And that's been a big one for me as well. Sometimes I get stuck in that, but I remember we are just spiritual beings having a human experience. And, part of the human experience is to live. That's it. Starlights, take care of yourself, eat, drink water, and I'll see you next time.